Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video today about how I was forced to learn the world differently than everybody else, and how I was forced to live my life differently than everybody else, also. And it's all due to my mother's criminal behavior, all of the harassment, the crimes, the abuse, the Munchausen by proxy, all of the problems she has created along the way, starting from the time I was a small child, changed the course of my life to not be the same as everybody else. It wasn't even an option to live my life in the same manner that the rest of the world has the chance to do that. Most people who have, let's just say, a terrible childhood, or their parents have other issues, let's say they have substance abuse issues, or just other strange issues, not in the manner in which I'm dealing with, because what I'm dealing with is extremely unique. There is not another case comparable to my situation whatsoever ever in history. It'll all become known once the entire story blows, once this all becomes public and arrests are made. It will become very apparent why. But until then, I'm going to continue to make the videos and explain all the different scenarios, the different crimes, the different situations, and how I've been forced to live my life differently. So let's just say, somebody who comes from a terrible home, for many different reasons, it could be any reason, but when that child turns 18, they then have the opportunity to go off and live their life and make of it whatever they choose. In my situation, that is exactly what I thought I was doing. The problem is that the disorders and the abuse and the crimes are so extensive that that was never allowed to happen in my situation. Anyone else in a predicament where they're wanting to leave home because their home situation was that bad, they have a full opportunity to grab life by the horns and basically, build whatever they want, become whatever they want, as long as they work hard to do that. That is possible in anybody else's situation. In my situation, because this went on for some time before I started piecing together what was actually going on. I wasn't aware right away. So that is what I started to do, or what I thought I was going to do. But in my situation, because of the harassment and the abuse and the crimes, there were so many people and agencies working from behind the scenes, with my mother placing all these delusional phone calls every step of the way, that it was destroying everything I was building from the minute I turned 18 and was living in my own home that I owned. Had been at the same job for a couple of years at that point, was gainfully employed for a couple of years at that point, had been working even longer than that, had already had a business at age 11. Um, that was not I was not able to carry any of this out because I was constantly being harassed and disrupted from this agency or that agency, or different situations would come about. Then my mother would insert herself in them and cause extreme destruction, cause these people to blow my life apart. But it was really her delusional phone call placing to all of these people that would cause these situations to happen. And then, different situations as life goes on in a regular manner. Situations happen to people all along the way. Nobody lives an exact perfect life. So every step of the way, she was inserting herself in any situation she could, or she was directly causing these situations to happen. And it continued on every second of every day, from the time I was a small child. So here I thought I was cutting all this off and I was going to go live my life as an adult on my own. The entire time she was using agencies and people to harass me, create problems, cause false arrests, running from different agencies, CPS chasing me for years on end. It's turned into decades. It's been 2 decades. I have over 100 sheets of paper printed on all of the fall CPS reporting from 2002 to 2020. I have on paper. There is more after that I have not ordered. So I will do separate videos on those situations as well. It'll probably take me a couple videos to go through all that, because I know there's a lot of videos out currently about how CPS kidnaps kids and they violate rights and laws, which is all very true. However, I managed to stay a little bit ahead of them every step of the way. With every interaction, I was forced to learn all of that stuff long before social media was ever even a thing. So I will talk about that separately. But with my situation, I was never allowed to just go build my life without disruption, without interference, without harassment, without all these crimes. Somebody else who's just, just did not have a good home life growing up, they're allowed to break off, break free, go build their life however they choose. There is not disruptions ongoing in the background for decades, with one of those parents causing extreme destruction, extreme chaos, extreme problems, extreme crimes. That is not going on in anybody else's situation. Those people are allowed to go off and live their life freely. In my situation, that was never allowed to happen. So I'm going to start back from the beginning, because, even if something happens in the current day, and I'm trying to explain this with whatever situation's going on in the current, I can't just talk about the current, because this isn't something that just jumped out and about in front of me recently and became a problem. This deranged lunatic has been causing these problems for decades, and she's grown it over the course of time, snowballed it like a giant snowball. They got bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where it's just so far out of control. I can't make any further moves until arrests are made, because the wipeouts, the harassment, the crimes are going to continue on. It's never going to stop until arrests are made. And because it's gone on for decades, there are so many people and agencies involved at this point. It's not going to just be one arrest. It's going to be like, I don't know, 15 to 20, probably right off the rip. But in a regular person's situation that does not have a good life growing up, they are allowed to go off and build whatever they want. They have every opportunity at their fingertips. Whereas I was not allowed to have that. I was not even aware of that initially. I thought that's what I was doing. But I was continuously wiped out repeatedly over and over and over, chased by different agencies, forced from homes that I've owned. I've been forced from 3 homes that I've owned, 2 that I've rented, and I was able to return back to this home. And I've owned this home for 8 years. I was gone for about a year and a half, and it was all due to the chaos, the crimes, and the harassment. So, with my situation, it is very, very different, because my mother is a deranged lunatic, with many undiagnosed mental and personality disorders. However, I am the one who brought in the mental health professional. That is Charmaine, who I speak of in a lot of videos. When I mention Charmaine, that's who Charmaine is. So it's not that there's not professional eyes on the situation. There is. So it is known some of the disorders that she has. It's just somebody with the disorders that she has is not going to say, oh, yeah, I have a problem. Something's wrong with me. I'm going to go get diagnosed. That's not how she operates. Somebody with that mentality, with that many personality and mental disorders, would not be admitting they even have a problem and would continue on with the way they behave and would never be able to get them diagnosed. So in my situation, in order to get a full proper diagnosis, there would have to be a criminal minds team brought in with numerous different professionals, on different levels and different backgrounds pertaining to these mental and personality disorders. And it would also require Charmaine to be present and myself to be present in order for my mother to not manipulate the person who would be doing the evaluation and like basically doing the diagnosis. It would require that many people to pull this off to get an it would be numerous diagnoses at this point. So it would take I would definitely have to be there. Charmaine would definitely have to be there, and we would have to be like behind one of those mirrors where she would not be able to see us, because most likely she would be able to manipulate, even if they had a full-blown criminal minds team who are very high end in that subject, it would still require numerous of them, and she would still be able to manipulate them. And the only people who would be able to decipher what is a lie or a delusion or is not real whatsoever in any way, shape, or form, or had never happened, the only people who would be able to verify that would be Charmaine or myself at this point, because Charmaine has spoken to my mother many times. I already knew before hiring her, and again, I did try to hire numerous mental health professionals. However, I had to fire some of them because they were manipulated by my mother right off the rip. I knew from the very beginning that she was going to hunt down, once she figured out that person existed, she would be able to hunt them down, figure out their name, figure out, their office or their phone number, and start contacting them and calling them regularly. I already knew she was going to do that. So that is what I kind of started with when I first brought Charmaine in, and let her know that, this would be happening at some point. I don't know how long it's going to take her to figure out she exists, but this is how it's going to go. And that's part of the reason I'm bringing you in. I need a diagnosis on her. She's been getting away with all these very serious crimes. It's destroyed my life. And I knew for a fact she would be calling at some point, which happened a few months in. And then she continued to call her regularly and basically just tell on herself for her crimes. So when I try to tell people that I have a mental health professional involved, or she tells other people that there's a mental health professional involved, she tells people it's because I have this ongoing mental disorder that has always existed, which has never been real. People just believe it because most people in the world do not hire a mental health professional because they're the ones that are the victim of many serious crimes. The harassment is ongoing, and it's the deranged mother causing all these problems, which have been going on for decades. It's still going on, and it's not going to stop until someone stops her. Nobody does that. So there are professional eyes on this situation, and she has gathered this information directly from my mother telling on herself. This is not me walking into somebody's office and me saying, oh, she did this to me, oh, she did that to me, oh, this happened, oh, that happened. That is not what is going on here. um, I let the woman get to know me very well before my mother started calling. I started telling her about who I was, what had been going on in my life, and then my mother started calling. But I warned her in advance the things she was going to say, how she was going to try to use her to her advantage, and she saw right away. She was the right person because she was able to see right away that that is what was going on, and that she could not be believed. So it took years. My mother continued to call her regularly and tell on herself for years before, I'm not sure at what point, but eventually, even though I said this to many people along the way, so I don't know why it took years, but somebody eventually let her know that this woman works for me and we're here to get my mother diagnosed, and she's there to document the ongoing crimes that my mother's committing, and along with the large agencies and other people that have helped participate in these crimes against me, and that's what she's there for. Eventually somebody told her all of this, even though I don't know how many times it was said already, but that's when she stopped calling her regularly. So this was probably 4 or 5 years in, to her existing, that she finally stopped calling her to tell on herself. She then realized that she was being documented the entire time, and she was telling on herself every step of the way. And then all of those people along the way who had called, because then she would give the phone number to other people and other agencies as she was causing more destruction, more harassment, getting all these agencies to harass me, all these people. She would then give Charmaine's number to all those people and agencies, and then they would call Charmaine and then tell on themselves. And they would then know who gave Charmaine then knows who gave them the phone number, what false information they were given about me. And then those people continue to talk to Charmaine about me, and they then tell on themselves. So that has also happened many, many times throughout the course of her being involved. So again, this is not a normal situation where a mental health professional is brought into the situation. I already knew this was how I was going to go about documenting this properly, because there is so many high level officials and police officers involved in the crimes. There is no way to report the crimes or document them properly. But in the way I did it, she is actually able to see before her eyes some of these crimes. And then by receiving all these delusional phone calls and this false information from the agencies and people who have been harassing me, it's very clear what the problem is and what's going on. So that is how I went about things. Also, at the time she was brought in, I was very close to death. I did not know if I was going to live. At that point, I had two brain injuries, two very severe brain injuries. I had lost memories that were coming back. They had been coming back for about 4 years around the time I brought her in, and most of them had come back at that time. But I was in a fight for my life from severe carbon monoxide poisoning and 2 brain injuries, which were initially left untreated when it was an extreme medical emergency. And it was my life's work, my own merits, and my money that paid for our treatment at a private center to keep us alive and get us to where we are today, because this also includes my younger son. Because I gave birth while suffering from the carbon monoxide poisoning. That was the first brain injury, and he also acquired a brain injury. So that was in 2016. My second brain injury was January of 2018. Charmaine was brought in January of 2020, about a year into me treating at the private center. Now, prior to that, I wanted to bring somebody in, but because I was so sick and near death and I had no support system, and my mother was pumping up the people around me full of delusions, even though there's no contact, no relationship, she was getting my dad to pick up my older kids from my house, and she was repeating delusions to all 3 of them. They would come back to my house repeating delusions, screaming delusions at me. She was basically saying things to make them believe that I was never injured. There is no carbon monoxide poisoning and there is no brain injuries, and it's all a mental disorder. So their behavior toward me during this was very excessive, very extreme. This was an inpatient injury, and I was attempting to treat this on an outpatient basis. And it was very hard to do because I could not get from point A to point B. It took a year of almost daily treatment in order for me to even bring her in, and even just for me to even be able to get to her office once a week, because I could not do it. I literally could do nothing but lay here, get to treatment, and for a short period of time, I worked. It was 8 to 10 hours a week or less, or sometimes I did not work at all prior to COVID. That went on for about a year and a half. And I should not have been standing, driving, or working, but I am self employed. That is the only reason I got to survive and was able to pull this off. It was a very extreme situation. At no time should I have ever been there. And no, I was not able to work. But because the injury is invisible and it's internal, nobody realized that I was that sick and injured and I was that close to death. So that's how I was able to pull this off. But bringing Charmaine in was very hard to do. I couldn't even incorporate it into my life. I literally spent about 3 years completely incapacitated, laid out on my couch, unable to do anything at all for those 3 years before even attempting to incorporate any type of daily functioning into my life. And where I am today, all these years later, because now this is 2025, I still don't have daily functioning. It's never going to happen. There's been too much injuries and re-injuries. So, during the time I brought her in, it was still very extreme. My brain was very fragile. I was completely overloaded with carbon monoxide, my entire system, all of my cells, and very heavily still in the brain with raw open brain tissue, inches of space between my brain and my skull. The back left side was sagging and throbbing continuously for those first 34 and a half months. And there was knots of carbon monoxide, fist-sized knots, 2 of them loaded up on the left side, deep internally, and on the left side in the back of my brain. And I stayed that way every second of every day. Every exhaled breath hurt extremely bad. Every task took me every ounce of energy I had in my body just to even get up, to brush my teeth, and even get myself to that appointment every week was very hard to do. All I could literally do was just go to treatment and come back and lay here and then attempt to get the money to keep everything running, because it's my money that pays for everything, and then get to Charmaine on Sunday is what I would do. So being that sick, that close to death, that was the second reason I brought her in, because the people around me were not understanding how serious the situation was. The reasons for all that was my mother's criminal behavior, her preventing treatment for me and my son within the traditional medical system. When we first became injured, when it was very severe, she was still working as a Beaumont Hospital employee, and it was her actions, her criminal actions, that prevented our treatment initially, and that's how we ended up at the private center and how we ended up in such an extreme state of suffering. Now with how long this went on for in that manner, it went on for about 3 years in that extreme manner. There was no there was no option to do this or that. I literally had to lay here and suffer and tolerate the people around me screaming, acting, going on with their lives, acting as if that's not what's going on. I literally had to let the world go on around me and just lay here suffering, hoping someday I'd have enough treatment to where someday enough of it would be removed from my system and from my brain, and that brain tissue would be repaired enough to someday pick up the pieces of my life, just not knowing if that day was ever going to come. And it went on that way for those first 34 and a half months before there was a light at the end of the tunnel. So when I brought her in, I was in extreme physical, mental, and emotional distress due to how much extreme pain I was in continuously that was not under control. With how long treatment was withheld before beginning treatment, that was part of the problem there. And then with my mother pumping everybody up around me full of delusions, it was causing excessive fights. It was causing police and other agencies to come to my house as well. And at the same time that was all going on, my mother was in the background calling all those agencies and police departments, telling them that I'm a problem, that I've always been a problem. I'm a troublemaker. I'm a liar. I've always had this mental disorder, this drug problem. So when they would show up at my house, and I'm in physical distress because the people around me are just acting like that's not what's going on, but their behavior is due to my mother pumping everybody up full of delusions. Um, they would show up and act as if I was the problem, which is how I was falsely dragged from my home and significantly re-injured in May of 2021 by Sergeant Matthew Wilczynski here in Flat Rock, Michigan. So that all happened at the hands of my mother's delusional phone calls, the criminal harassment, using all these large agencies and people to do all this. Because remember, we have no contact, there is no relationship. It's been going on in this manner for decades at this point. So that is all the reasons Charmaine was brought in, to see all of this firsthand. Some of these situations came directly to her office where she saw it in front of her face as well. So there is professional eyes on the situation. Those are the reasons she was brought in. Now, she will stay involved until arrests are made. And this is all saw out to the very end till someday I get to pick up the pieces of my life, because I am permanently injured. I am permanently disabled. I don't receive assistance or help from anyone. I don't receive Social Security, and neither does my son. And we do have to live modified lives. There's a lot of things that we can't do even today. So we have to be very careful with what we do and how we go about our lives. And it's all due to these injuries and the length of time we were left untreated initially, is what pushed it to a more extreme degree. So I'm going to go back to the time I was a child and explain how I view the world differently, how I was forced to learn the world differently, and how I view how things work and how one would go about building a future. Because the way I think, the way I operate, and the way I build and provide and live is completely different than any other human being on the planet. So even as a small child, I knew that I wanted to build success. I knew I had to start at the bottom and work my way up, which is exactly what I started doing. I was making money at 10 years old, selling handmade bracelets. I then had a babysitting service at 11 and started working in restaurants at age 14, which I did for about 20 years. And I also became self-employed in 2007, and I became 100% self-employed by 2012. So I usually had numerous streams of income my entire life, all overlapping, which provides quite a bit of security. It provides more security than somebody who went to college for 20 years and has one good job. I have way more security than all of that because my hand is in many different pots, and it's always been. Now, when I was younger and I didn't quite understand things to that degree, and I was just trying to figure out how I was going to break free and how I was going to get away from this deranged lunatic and how I was going to be okay, because I was not physically, mentally, and emotionally okay. At age 10, I knew that I needed to be on my own, and I knew I needed to leave as soon as I turned 18 due to my mother poisoning batches of food. I was already aware at this point that she is calling my teachers in the background and getting them to harass me on a regular basis. Each year, she's calling every single one of them, and then some of them she's calling repeatedly throughout the year. And they're going back and forth with each other. Some of them are feeding into it, creating all these problems in my life. I was already aware of that at age 10. So because of how I was abused and treated, I was not allowed to have cable TV. This is long before internet ever existed. So I basically had just like a handful of channels, like the regular channels you would have on a regular TV, like 247 and whatever those stations are. And I only had books. I was very limitedly allowed to go to just a few people's houses, and she was controlling who I could be friends with as well. Which that's not a good thing to do to your child, because then your child is never going to learn how to um like gauge somebody else's behavior or learn other types of people and who you should be talking to and who you shouldn't. In my situation, every part of my life was controlled. She was controlling who I could talk to. She would take away every friend that I had. She would find a reason to say, "Oh, you can't talk to so and so anymore. You can't go to so and so's house anymore." And it would just be because that person's mom was a single mom and had a shitty car, or that person's mom smoked cigarettes, or where that person lived. She would take away friends based on those things. Now, because she managed to take away pretty much every single friend except for one by the time I was 18, I only had books. I did go to my one friend's house quite a bit, and her parents stayed around in this state till I was about 30 years old before they sold their house here in Michigan. And they had a couple other houses in a couple other states. We are still friends today. We do still have contact today. But I was not allowed to go to anybody else's house. So those were like a backup set of parents that I had with that specific friend, because they at least saw that there was something wrong with my mother. They didn't fully understand it. I do believe my friend's mom had said my mother's a narcissist. She at least knew that, and I'd never heard of that term before. She did know that. So, growing up all those years, I spent a lot of time in my room or just reading books because I had access to unlimited amounts of books. I could check them out at the library at school. If I really wanted to get something different, I could go to the local library, or my parents didn't have a problem like buying me books. If I said I wanted a book, they would buy it. So, with me, I had to learn the world differently because I was not able to make friends in the same way everybody else was. I was made fun of a lot because of that. She was controlling what I would wear. She would like pick out my clothes and say I could do this or I can't do that. I was being made fun of quite a bit because of how I was treated. And then with the teachers harassing me, but in the background, it's my mother causing them to do this to me. That caused another problem. So then there's kids making fun of me as well. So I really only had books. There was a few friends that would, kind of come and go a little bit, but by the time I was about to be done being a minor, I literally had one friend I was allowed to talk to. So that entire time, I learned the world through reading many different types of books. I would stay up all night reading books. And I know I've mentioned this in other videos where my mother poisoned batches of food my entire life. And I called her out on it around age 4. And that's where things became extremely hard for me because I should not have done that. I did not realize that was dangerous and how dangerous she actually was. So it created all these additional problems, and why she was spinning this false narrative about me, why she was calling all these people in the background, telling them false information about me, getting people to act toward me a certain way. That's why she did that, in case I tried to tell any of these people. So all I had was books, and I would stay up all night reading. I would also stay up all night with heartburn. Heartburn. It wasn't actually heartburn. It was the poison from whatever she was putting in the food coming up. And my mother also withholds medical treatment. As I just mentioned, how I was poisoned by carbon monoxide in 2018, really bad. My son and I were both left without treatment because she was a hospital employee. That is how that all began. And how we were left without treatment many, many times because she had others enter false information into our medical records. So because she withholds treatment, back then when I was a young child and I had any issues, I was not allowed to be sick. Even if I was sick, she'd still send me to school. I wasn't allowed to have like medications to like make me feel better because of the Munchausen by proxy. She likes to create physical, mental, and emotional pain and suffering. So when you don't have medications and there's something wrong with you and there's no relief from any of it, then you're physically suffering. So that happened to me with the heartburn when I was ingesting the poison food. Most of the time it was at dinner time. And I would then later have heartburn all night long to where I couldn't lay down in bed and I couldn't sleep because I didn't even know Tums existed until I was 18 years old. So I had no clue they existed. I wasn't allowed to be given any medications. She made sure that there wasn't anything within my reach to relieve myself of any pain or suffering or heartburn. So I stayed up all night because I couldn't lay down. I'd sit up and I had a night light plugged into the wall and I would sit against the wall and I would read books all night till 4 a.m. till my dad's alarm would go off for him to get up and go to work. And then I'd be really tired at school because I'd have the heartburn all night long with no relief. And there was a couple of times that I tried to suck it down and I eventually threw it up all over my bed. And her behavior when that did happen was very strange. She was walking, pacing back and forth. You could tell that she was guilty and she had created the problem. And I just wasn't allowed to say that there was anything wrong with me. I was scared to death. I didn't know what the hell it was. So it really took till I was pregnant with my first child. I was 18 years old, already working on buying my first house. So once I saw a doctor because I was pregnant, that's how I was aware. That's how I became aware of what Tums were. Prior to that, I had no clue. Now, I also had very bad periods growing up, like very heavy, very painful. I would literally be laid out, incapacitated from the pain. Now that I know what I know today because of what I've went through with my carbon monoxide poisoning and everything, when you're being poisoned in any way, shape, or form, doesn't matter what kind or where it's from, it creates a lot of pain and suffering in many different ways. It can go to many different areas of the body, depending on any previous injuries. And it created very heavy and painful periods with her poisoning the batches of food. That was what was causing all of that for me. So it was so excessive that, again, I had no pain relief. I didn't know what Tylenol or Motrin or Advil was. Again, until I was about 17 or 18, I finally found some Advil in one of the medicine cabinets. And that was the only relief I had ever experienced. I literally lived, I got my period when I was like 11, and I literally lived in pain all the way till I was an adult in my own home. So I was not allowed to be in pain. I was not allowed to have pain relief. I was not allowed to even say that anything was wrong with me. And I was not like treated or taken to the doctor unless it was something to benefit her or to prove there's something wrong with me, like mentally, or something to like a painful procedure that she would want done just to cause pain and suffering. Other than that, there was no proper like medical treatment for me all growing up. So this all happened, basically from the time I was 10 to the time I was 18, spending quite a bit of time suffering. So me reading all these different books, learning different situations, and I read all different types of books. It was not one specific kind. So with the variety that I had read, it gave me quite a bit of knowledge on many different subjects and a look into many different types of people's lives and personality types. And because I read, literally every kind of book you could imagine. So it gave me quite a bit of experience. So I had so much book experience and knowledge prior to going out into the world that when I did go out into the world on my own, I at least had that knowledge. Now, I was working in restaurants at age 14, and my parents didn't have a problem with me going to work or working more than one job, because what I did is, to be away from my mother, I went and got 2 work permits. I got my license right when I turned 16, had my car bought before then because I already had a job, I already had money, and I worked 2 jobs so I could stack up faster and get myself to safety in my own home right when I turned 18. So a mix between reading these books and going out into the world at a young age and working with the general public gave me quite a bit of life experience. So that way, when I did finally break free and I got into my own home, I literally moved in while I was in labor with my oldest child. I was in labor for 51 hours. I didn't say anything to anybody until like 18 hours had gone by. So we had gotten the majority of the stuff moved in. And there was numerous reasons why I did that. But that was my situation. And I eventually did go to the hospital. By the 40 something ish, I was like the 45th hour, I finally went to the hospital. But that all went on, all those years where I was not living in a normal person's life. I was not allowed to do the same things as other people. All these problems were going on. And I didn't even know CPS existed until I turned 18, had that first baby. And the day after I came home from the hospital from having him, that woman almost ripped my brand new, it was a brand new home, almost ripped the door off of my home, illegally entering my home. Now, growing up, I was not allowed to know my rights. So my mother hid a lot of information. Because she controlled the flow of information about anybody around me, any potential situations with family members, or things going on TV, or celebrities, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. She controlled the flow of information, and she also made sure that I did not know my rights. And she also wanted to make sure that I was never going to tell on her for her crimes and her poisoning food. So she had to have all of this control, which she managed to keep all of this control. Because obviously I did not learn my rights until here I was repeatedly dealing with CPS and police situations, police harassment charges that should have never been put on me, which happened many times, because I will do a separate video on my criminal record, all the different sets of charges that I've faced, all the different problems that have come about, because half of them shouldn't even be on my record. It is my mother behind a lot of these, or who had exacerbated the situation. So I will talk about that in a separate video. But growing up, the way I had to learn things, and just knowing at 10 years old, I just have to get into my own home, that's all I could think of. So all I was focused on was making sure I could get to work and work two jobs so I'd have enough money to get into my own home right when I turned 18. So I did that, and that was my main goal at that time. That's what I stayed focused on. And even when I mentioned in the last video that I filmed about how my mother had taken me to a psychiatrist around age 16 to get me prescribed pills that I didn't belong having or taking. I have the intake paperwork from that day. You can very clearly see what I wrote, that you can see I'm a hardworking teenager, that I work all the time. I work 5 days a week. And that I make at least $500 a week or more. Now, this is in the year 2000, so that's a lot of money for that time frame. And in my fun time, what I do for fun is that I work. And you can tell by my answers to those questions that I needed to be out on my own. There's clearly an agenda that I have, and I'm sticking to it, and I'm very focused on it. And the fact that I thought working was fun, because my entire life was being controlled. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere, talk to anybody, make friends, do the same things that everybody in my class was out doing. Wasn't allowed to do any of those things. So you could clearly see that I just needed to be on my own, especially due to the poisoning of the food, the way she would behave, the way she would gaslight and cause reactive abuse situations. I know I mentioned Darvo in the other video. That's a term that I learned recently, but that's what she's been doing all my life. And I just didn't know how to describe it, but I knew that there was a very serious problem. It was not going to stop. And my only way for this to stop was to get myself into my own home. Even if I did not have all the answers, I knew I would be able to figure it out as time went on, as I was learning and doing things in life, that I would figure it out, which is exactly what happened. As soon as I got into my first home, I had this huge sense of relief. It did not matter that I had this new baby and I'm in this new home and I have a mortgage, and it did not matter. I made enough money to cover all of it by myself. My oldest son's dad was only in my home for about a year. And I knew from the beginning that he was not going to be around long term, because he was not on the same level in life as I was. He was also 7 years older than me. And everything that I had bought in the house, and everything that was going on, that was all my stuff on my own. So he was not contributing very much at all. He was actually using more resources than he was bringing in. It only took him living with me for 1 month for me to figure that out. I just had to put up with him until the baby got a little bit older. It went on for about a year, and then my dad actually came and kicked him out, because then he became extremely abusive. So I went from one silently abusive situation that no one was aware of, and she was treating me this way without anybody ever seeing, including my dad, and then, got into a relationship with someone that was even more abusive physically. And I had no choice but to take that route because there was no way for me to get out onto my own, just to take the first steps to get me out onto my own. I only needed him for a brief period of time, which is exactly how that went. And then as soon as he was gone, I remained paying everything myself from that day forward. And then it just didn't matter. I realized real quick that even if I never got $1 in child support from him, that I was better off on my own, not receiving anything. And I was exactly right. That is exactly how it went. Now, with all the problems my mother caused in school, all the harassment, all the teachers treating me a certain way, kids making fun of me and whatnot, I was not able to date people out of my school. Once I was in high school, I wasn't really allowed to. I wasn't really allowed to date in the first place because she would create a problem with it. But I couldn't really date people because of how I was made fun of, how people perceived me. I needed somebody either older than me or somebody from another school. And so that's how I ended up with someone much older than me. However, he had nothing going for himself in life, still doesn't to this day. So that only lasted a brief period of time. I just needed to break free from my home and on and into my own home. And that was how I went about doing it. So I was able to pull all of that off. I was an extreme relief. There was an extreme sense of relief when I finally got into my home and I was not being bothered by this deranged lunatic because she was also going through my room every day. She went through my room, went through every little thing. There was no privacy. She even would just walk into the bathroom whenever she wanted. I literally had no privacy ever growing up from the time I was a small child to the time I got into my own home. So to have that sense of relief when I did finally get there, it was very, very extreme. It was a very extreme sense of relief. And a lot of the problems that she had caused along the way led to me being forced to make those decisions that I made and having the baby and getting into my own home. Her actions against me, harassing me all through school and growing up, caused these situations to happen because at the root is the stolen trust fund that I was left, in the late 1980s. So from the time that trust fund was left, and here now she's threatened because she knows that she poisons food. Um, here she was trying to make sure that I was kicked out of school. She made that part of her agenda, making sure I'd be kicked out of school or making sure she could get me deemed mentally incompetent on paper so she could gain access to this trust fund, which she did attempt to do. And it did not go her way. It showed I was pretty intelligent. So it didn't go her way, which is why she eventually threw those papers at me with the IQ score on it. So, with her attempting to have me, all those actions, all that harassment, all those false phone calls, the false bomb threat she called into the high school, her getting me prescribed those pills and me getting kicked out of school for having them. They were actually prescribed to me. She's holding the bottle. So, I was charged with them not being in the bottle. That's out of my control. I have a deranged lunatic. I'm a minor. I have a deranged lunatic for a mother who controlled all that. That was her intention. Her intention was to pull all of that off, either have me deemed mentally incompetent or incarcerated because that's what she was going for. And so I'd be kicked out of school so that way I could be seen as someone who can't handle being given the money. And she wanted to control my life and me to do this or me to do that. And she wanted full control over that. And that's not what I was doing. So from the time I was a very small child, here my mentality is something totally different because I'm dealing with a deranged lunatic narcissist who's poisoning food every night for dinner. And she's calling all of my teachers in the background. So here I have to strategically think how I'm going to get out of this. And I'm so young, and I know that I'm not able to even get into my own home until I'm 18 years old. And I was literally counting down the days because I knew that I could not get out of this situation. And I did not realize until 2019, when my memories started coming back, that my dad was not aware my mother was doing all of this to me. She made sure that he wasn't aware that's what she was doing because she triangulated so well. And it's more than triangulation. She's like pentagondulating. And she's got all these angles of people and she's controlling all of it. Did not realize that he did not know this. But I also knew that he was not willing to leave her. So I had even said to him numerous times that he needed to divorce her. We even had a conversation about it when I was about 20 years old. I had been in my own house for a couple of years. I don't know why it never happened. I'm not sure. He was the one who brought it up on his own at that point. But I knew as a young child, he was not willing to leave her. So I don't think he understood the extent of the abuse at that time. And for some reason, with how my mother controlled the flow of information, she had me thinking at that time that my dad was aware she was doing all this and acting that way. And then it wasn't until 2019 when all of my memories were coming back. Once I started everyday treatment, once I was under everyday hyperbaric oxygen treatment, repairing my brain tissue, is when those memories came back. And I realized that he did not know any of this. So I brought all this up with him then when the memories came back. And so then I verified, like, he did not know anything to that degree, and it's because of how she made others perceive things. So that all went on all of those years, just living my life in survival mode, fight or flight mode, walking on eggshells. Can't make one wrong move, or the ticking time bomb explodes over there, and she goes off and she goes all crazy, controlling everything and causing all these problems. And then when there's a jealousy or envy incident, then she creates another problem from behind the scenes. She'll get an agency or a teacher or somebody to harass or somebody to do something. Anytime my dad like took me somewhere like without her, that's what she would do every step of the way. Even here when we were here working on this house a few years ago, that's how my dad kept getting all those repeated UTIs. He'd be over here working on this or that, nothing major. But then he'd go back home and she'd be jealous and she would poison his food again, and he'd be back at the doctor with another UTI. So that went on, like I said, decades. It's been going on for decades. But my mentality behind how I had perceived the world at that time, and what I was thinking and how I had to get myself out of the situation, and the tools that I had, the resources that I had at the time were very minimal. All I knew how to do was work very hard. So right away, I never had a minimum wage job. I always made more than minimum wage. I always had that plus usually an hourly pay plus tips. I always had tipped positions. I always worked positions where I had unlimited potential to make unlimited amounts of money, because like putting a cap on it in my mind is a whole other situation. You're limiting how much money you think your time is worth by putting a cap on what you make per hour or per day or per week or per month or however you want to perceive it. I never thought that way. I always thought unlimited, 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 and then numerous streams of income, because unlimited, unlimited, and that's how I always thought, because I knew I had to get into my own home. I was thinking this as a teenager with numerous streams of income as a teenager. So that all continued on into my 20s, into my early 30s, numerous streams of income, had numerous businesses, worked in many different types of restaurants and bars, and then eventually became self-employed in the adult entertainment industry in 2007 as well. Still having other streams of income along the way, and then being invested in real estate long term from the time I was 18. All of those produce quite a bit of financial security as a whole in the long run. And I knew that I had to keep it that way in order to keep myself secure, because I don't have anywhere to fall back to. I don't have anyone to fall back on, because I have a deranged mother who creates all of these problems, and my dad refused to leave her, and they're still married. There's no convincing him how serious the situation was. I had tried to at one point in 2019. In 2020, he was not hearing me to the degree that I needed him to hear me on what has all been going on. So with the way I had perceived how to go out into the world and how to produce income and how to run my life, I had to put my income first and foremost all the time. And it's still like that today. Even when I was near death, the only thing that I could focus on was making sure that my baby stayed alive, my older kids did the chores, and while I laid out incapacitated, and I got myself to the strip club very minimally, 4 to 8 to 10 hours a week, or not at all, until after COVID. After I took over like a year and a half off during COVID. I took that the full COVID pay, and that is how I got enough treatment to finally have some type of relief from the pain and suffering, relief from some of these symptoms, and be able to work more regularly, even though I've never regained my full capacity. Like just minimally, I'm about half the capacity I once was prior to my injury currently, and that's after 200 grand in out-of-pocket treatments, plus about $1 million my private insurance spent as well to get me to where I am today. So I still thought that every step of the way. It's the income that has to come first because that's what keeps everything flowing and running. It can't be disrupted. And there were so many times that my mother had used all these agencies to financially wipe me out, chase me from all these houses I've owned, cause all these restarts from nothing. And that was her intention because here she was spinning this whole false narrative in the background with all these people and agencies and police departments. And she's doing that, causing all these problems from the background with no contact because here she is still trying to gain access to this trust fund. Here she was fraudulently gaining access to it by portraying herself to have custody of and raise my older two kids, which was not real. She did all that and caused all those problems so it would look like I was so financially unstable or so mentally unstable or I'm just so unstable in general. Here she was causing all these situations to happen. So for somebody to always have to be worried about that 24/7 their entire life to maintain their own home, their own peace, their own comfortability, their own life, that's what I've had to stay focused on my entire life because of the way she has harassed and created all these problems and committed all these crimes against me. All these problems have come out of it. That was how I had to view everything. And that is my view on everything today. The numerous streams of income do have to stay running in that manner. Once I became injured, building forward, I was basically left to build off of what I had rebuilt because I had just gotten done rebuilding from her last escapade. I was left with rebuilding with what I had left from that last escapade once I became injured. So everything I had acquired and had going the day I became injured in 2018, that's what I was left with going forward for the rest of my life because I'm not going to receive proper compensation from the people who had caused these injuries. And I will get into that further in a different video on how the workers' comp system, it's all a fraudulent system. I will talk about this in a different video down the line after I get some of these more important videos out, and I will name names. So to live your life, in survival mode, walking on eggshells, fight or flight mode all the time, 24/7, that's still my current situation. That's my normal. I just had to learn how to compartmentalize all of it in order to keep things running, in order to deal with life, in order to, keep each one of my kids in line and keep them all going as well. That's how I had to perceive life and the world. So with me being self employed, I learned from a very young age that you are never going to get anywhere working for somebody else. The way you're taught in the public school system and what they teach you how to be an employee for somebody else. Even when you go to college, they're teaching you to be an employee for somebody else. And the system is not meant to be beat. You're not meant to get out of it and be successful. You're not meant to build wealth. I've been building wealth from the time I was a teenager. I just keep being wiped out by the deranged lunatic. It fully took me till about 2013. So I was almost 30 years old. Took me to realize what was actually going on in the root of all of it and what she had been doing. And she's behind every single thing that had gone on. It had never stopped. So the day I moved out thinking I'm breaking free, I never really broke free. Here she was causing all these problems immediately from behind the scenes, stayed behind the scenes, kept doing it all along, still going on today. And that's why when I said at age 17, 18, I said, I don't need you. I'll be successful on my own. And she laughed like a deranged lunatic. Oh no, you're not. You didn't go to college. Ah, ha, ha, ha. Okay, well, I did become successful on my own at a very young age. I owned two homes by the time I was 23 years old. Forced into that second one due to her escapades and harassment agencies chasing me. But she was laughing like that when I said that because she had every intention of calling all these agencies, continuing on with these delusional phone calls, causing all this harassment, all these problems. She had every intention of continuing it on as soon as I moved out. That's why she laughed like that when I said that. But at the root, the intention was to make sure that that she was going to receive this trust fund that was left for me. She wanted to do everything in her power to make sure that that money did not go to me. And still to this day, it is still being hidden from me. And she is still attempting to cause problems to make sure that she is the one who gets to collect what's left because there is money left and she cannot still fraudulently gain access the way she was because the two children of mine that she used to fraudulently gain access are over the age of 18. So it's not going to work. But the way I had to view life, the way I had to view the world in order to keep my life running. I had to have my income, my numerous streams of income, and my health on top, because that is what is going to continue to provide for myself to keep my physical body safe, away from this deranged lunatic, and be able to have peace in my own life. So I had to live my life thinking that way. From the time I was 10 years old, I had been thinking that way. Now, yes, I did work for other people in the beginning. I started at the bottom. I worked for other people. I worked in different restaurants, different bars, I was a casino dealer at one point. I had worked in numerous lines of work, and I learned the world firsthand. And even in industries I have not worked in, because I worked with the general public, talking to many different types of people along the way, I learned many things, many different subjects, many different lines of work from talking to all of these people long term, working with the general public. So I have a great deal of knowledge in the way I went about learning the world, and learning reality, learning how things work. And because of all the harassment and crimes and all the systems I've been forced to deal with, I also had to learn how the world really works, because what they tell you is not how the world really works. So I have a full view of what's actually going on top of the fact that my brain swelled. It broke all the way through. I was left for dead. I was dead in my bed for 4 hours, came back on my own. And when I came back, any little bit of programming I had, which I did not have much because I was not sitting around watching TV ever. There was no internet, there was no smartphones. I literally spent my whole life working in being in the real world. Any little bit of programming that I had, it broke. So when my brain tissue broke, when all the layers of my brain broke, it broke away any type of programming, any type of brainwashing, any type of systematic programming that the world instills in the general public. That was no longer there. I didn't have much of it anyway because of the way I was living my life. So I definitely could see things very clearly after that brain injury happened in 2018. But all along the way, my life has been very different. I've never been allowed to just freely make my choices and carry them out, freely make my plans and carry them out. I always have to have numerous avenues, 4 to 6 different options to make my next moves, because at any given time, chaos and destruction can strike. As soon as my mother creates another problem, as soon as she places another delusional phone call, my life blows apart into pieces. So all along the way, I've always had to have 4 to 6 different avenues of what my next moves may be or could be, because my plans can't just be carried out. There always has to be backup plans on backup plans on backup plans because of how she operates. Now, this is criminal. These actions are criminal in a very extreme manner because she's using many agencies and people to help her do this as well. Um, so, me going about my life, I was never really out dating people. I always had kids. I always had a very busy life, and I was always focused on making my money and building success and rebuilding after each wipeout. That those all those disruptions along the way, those complete wipeouts, took a lot of my time away from me, where I should have been freely enjoying my life and going places and meeting people or dating people. I was never able to do that because of all the harassment, all the chaos, all the destruction. um, Now, with dating people, she saw that as an opportunity to blow my life apart, even as an adult, and she has nothing to do with my life. She never met anyone I was really ever dating, maybe a couple people ever, for a very, very short period of time. It was something very short in passing, but she had nothing to do with any of that. In general, I never really dated anyone. I've been single my entire adult life, except for a couple times. I dated a couple people a couple times in my 20s, but really it's not something that was ever able to be fit into my life because of all the chaotic disasters and destruction. And then she uses those situations to blow my life apart. So when it comes to dating, I wasn't allowed to just freely live my life and just go date people. On top of the fact that I had become so successful and so high up on the chain at such a young age, it was very risky dating somebody, because here I was at such a young age ahead of a lot of people. And now that I've been building for as long as I've been building, I'm really far ahead of a lot of people. So it's not that easy to just date somebody. I can't just find somebody on my level. It's not, it's not something that's easy to find with where I've built my life to. So I just kept all of that separate. I kept, if I did go out here or there, I'm not saying I never went out with people or anything like that, because I did. And then working in the entertainment industry, yes, of course, I went out from time to time. but I would usually keep it separate or keep it short and sweet. There would never really be like a boyfriend in the picture, or I was never in the dating scene. I don't generally date people. I don't have the time to squeeze that into my life. That's really still my current situation. Everything is just kept short and sweet. And this is how I've had to view the world. So I will be back with more on all of this. I just had to talk a little bit about my different life.